During that night, I was in a horizontal position with my eyes shut, existing in a state that was neither fully asleep nor completely awake. During the quiet period, as a soft breeze caused the curtains to shift, the door opened without making a sound. Without raising my head, I quietly stated, Alex. Elmsworth. However, the voice that responded was not that of Alex. Julian articulated his words in a subdued and tentative manner. I am experiencing difficulty in achieving sleep. I opened my eyes and observed the unadorned outline in the doorway. The moonlight illuminated his shoulder, casting partial light on his face. I was uncertain about how to respond. The arrival of him in my room at this hour was unforeseen. Julian, is there an issue? I inquired gently, my tone reflecting a degree of astonishment. I do not possess that information. I am unable to sleep, he stated upon entering. He approached, and I positioned myself upright on the bed, readjusting the blanket for comfort. What would you like me to do? Would you like some water? He responded by shaking his head. No, I simply wish to engage in conversation, provided I am not causing any inconvenience. A palpable tension was evident in his voice, an oppressive weight that permeated the room. You are not causing any inconvenience, I stated, although my tone exhibited some uncertainty. However, is it appropriate to address this matter at this hour? Are you currently considering a particular matter? He exhibited a nonchalant gesture by shrugging his shoulders. His eyes briefly connected with mine before diverting downward. I am uncertain. At times it appears that there are expectations placed upon me by others. University, my father, all individuals involved. However, in your presence, I do not experience that pressure. His statement resonated oddly within me. In an effort to comprehend the situation, I adjusted my position and rested my hand on the edge of the bed. Please take a seat, I stated almost automatically. Narrator, are you prepared? What distinguishes this story from others? This document outlines the initiation of a process characterized by conflicting emotions and indistinct boundaries. If this is your initial exposure to a confession of this nature, please remain engaged, subscribe, and activate notifications. This narrative will present the most unexpected elements you have encountered. He paused briefly before taking a seat next to me. He exhibited a youthful nervousness while positioning his hands on his knees and remaining silent for a brief period. Subsequently, he initiated a conversation. I am aware that my father has affection for me, he stated while continuing to avert my gaze. At times I experience a sense of alienation, as if I do not fit within his realm. Julian's manner of speaking in this context was unexpected. The individual consistently exhibited a cheerful demeanor, displaying a hint of mischief, characterizing him as a young man who appeared to be carefree. It was not apparent that there was underlying turmoil. That is a typical occurrence, I stated. You are undergoing growth and transformation. The duration of these feelings is limited. You are familiar with your father as well as with me. Julian paused briefly before articulating his thoughts in a manner that was nearly inaudible. What if I never feel like a stranger to you? His words lingered in the atmosphere, resonating in the silence. A peculiar constriction developed in the region of my chest. I was unable to compel myself to direct my gaze towards him. The rapid beating of my heart indicated a heightened state of emotion, yet I lacked the resolve to comprehend the underlying reasons. Julian, I stated, such occurrences exist. It may be beneficial to take some time for personal reflection. What are the implications of desiring companionship? Elmsworth provided a prompt response. The tone of his voice conveyed a challenge, yet it also carried an undertone of a plea. At that moment, I recognized the necessity to regain my composure. Observe, I stated, my tone more assertive. At this point, it is essential to recall the appropriate course of action. I am your stepmother, engaging in this dialogue. My speech diminished as he redirected his gaze towards me. The expression observed in his eyes exhibited a significant combination of vulnerability and fear. Claire, he stated, and the manner in which he articulated my name induced a chill along my spine. I did not intend to perceive this situation as incorrect. However, upon reflection regarding you, I find it difficult to comprehend how it could be perceived otherwise. That is the point at which I should have ceased further action. I should have intervened and instructed him to exit the room. However, I refrained from doing so, as that gaze compelled me to acknowledge my own emotions concurrently. In the subdued illumination of the room, Julian's facial features were distinctly visible, his expression reflecting a juxtaposition of childhood vulnerability and adult complexity. "May I sleep here with you?" Elmsworth inquired in a subdued manner. I experienced a brief period of astonishment. I refrained from probing the significance of his statements. The individual should have been perceived solely as a confused boy in need of assistance. I inhaled deeply and consciously maintained my composure. "Certainly," I responded with caution, as he transitioned to the opposite side of the bed. The blanket was repositioned to enhance stability and comfort. A sense of nervous tension was present within me. However, I held the role of his stepmother. He was a 19-year-old male individual. I retrieved my phone to divert my attention. A message was received from Alex. "I will not be home tonight. I will be at the office for the entire night." The receipt of this message heightened the sense of unease I experienced. In the presence of Alex, the considerations regarding the appearance of the situation would be unnecessary. At this point, it was essential to concentrate on comprehending Julian's sensitivity and to formulate an appropriate response. "Are you functioning within normal parameters?" "Elmsworth," I inquired, turning my head to face him. "Being present with you generates a positive feeling," he articulated deliberately. The depth of his voice exceeded my expectations. A period of silence ensued. I repeatedly affirmed the same notion to myself. "He is merely a boy. Assistance is required to navigate his current circumstances." However, I then perceived movement and was taken aback. Julian approached my position. He gradually positioned himself behind me, extending an arm to make contact with my back in a gentle manner. The physiological response of my heart rate increased, yet I maintained a stationary position. "Julian." "Elmsworth," I communicated in a low voice. "What is your current activity?" He stated, "I am experiencing a sensation of coldness." However, there was an element in his tone that suggested it extended beyond mere coldness. I inhaled deeply. It was necessary to approach this situation with care. The individual exhibited youthfulness, likely experiencing confusion and grappling with the myriad of emotions encountered. This must be considered innocent, correct? I attempted to persuade myself of that while remaining still. The proximity I experienced was causing internal confusion. The heart rate increased significantly, and cognitive clarity was compromised. I repeatedly instructed myself to cease this behavior immediately. However, I found myself unable to take action. "Claire." "Elmsworth," he whispered. I continuously reiterated to myself, it was merely a moment that was misinterpreted. The situation is acceptable, it is benign, and I will refrain from excessive analysis. The kitchen was entered, and the process of breakfast preparation commenced. While I observed the operation of the coffee maker, the image of Julian located upstairs remained persistent in my thoughts. I needed to regain my composure. All systems are functioning as expected. Maintain composure. I instructed myself quietly. At that moment, I was startled by Alex's voice. "Good morning, darling," he stated, entering through the doorway with an expression of fatigue. For a brief moment, I ceased all movement, uncertain of the appropriate course of action. I promptly initiated a smile. "Good morning," I responded. Alex approached and made contact with my cheek through a kiss. His proximity increased my tension. "The aroma in this area is pleasant. Is breakfast nearing completion?" Elmsworth inquired, maintaining his characteristic cheerfulness. "Is the completion time approaching?" My voice was higher pitched than usual. As Alex exited the kitchen, he called back, "I will rest in the living room until that time. I am currently experiencing a state of fatigue." He proceeded to the living room, and a sense of panic constricted my chest. What are the potential outcomes if he ascends the stairs and observes Julian in the room? What should I communicate? What is the best method to convey this information? As Alex approached the living room, I exhaled deeply. At this moment, he was not ascending the stairs. The breakfast table was set promptly. However, my hands exhibited tremors. I made every effort to ensure that Alex remained unaware of any discrepancies. Upon observing the living room, I noted his position on the sofa, where he appeared to be falling asleep almost instantaneously. The consistent rhythm of his breathing provided a minor sense of reassurance. At this moment, I am secure, I assessed. However, it did not entirely alleviate the discomfort within me. This situation cannot persist in this manner. I require action to be taken. The coffee cup was positioned on the table, while my thoughts were in a state of rapid activity. Julian remained on the upper floor, while Alex was present in the current location. It was necessary to establish control over the situation in some manner. However, what is the method for achieving this? Subsequently, during the morning hours, while Alex remained in a state of sleep, Julian entered the kitchen. While seated at the breakfast table, I observed that the casual smile on his face elicited a sense of unease within me. The coffee cup was held firmly in my hands as I attempted to engage in his small talk with a sense of naturalness. "You appear quite beautiful today, Claire," he stated abruptly. The tone exhibited by him demonstrated a level of maturity that exceeded his chronological age. My eyes were drawn to him without conscious intent. It appeared that he had additional information to convey, yet he refrained from doing so. "Thank you, Julian," I responded, maintaining a calm and steady tone in my voice. A brief silence occurred. He initiated contact with the eggs on his plate using his fork and subsequently stated, "I hope your day isn't too busy. If assistance is required, please inform me." His demeanor was earnest, yet the inflection of his voice induced a sense of discomfort. "There are significantly more critical priorities to concentrate on at school," I stated. His statements, while courteous, resulted in a sense of discomfort. A slight sense of relief was experienced when he took hold of his bag and proceeded towards the door. However, a peculiar sensation persisted in my chest. This boy is experiencing an unusual sensation, is he not? After Julian departed from the residence, Alex awoke at approximately midday. The individual engaged in a leisurely breakfast before preparing to depart for work. Upon his departure, the house exhibited a notable decrease in ambient noise levels. During that evening, the family gathered for dinner, engaging in conversation as though all was well. I engaged in the activity, simulating a typical day. However, upon the onset of night, the peculiar tension re-emerged. Alex received a telephone call. Marcus, his closest companion, had experienced an accident and was currently receiving medical care in the hospital. Alex made the decision to depart without delay. While preparing, he leaned in and kissed me, stating, "Please remain calm, dear." I informed him, "I will return as soon as possible." After escorting him to the door, I observed his departure and subsequently closed the door. The sensation of loneliness experienced was notably profound. The experience suggested a presence within the house. However, a sense of complete isolation was simultaneously felt. Upon returning to the bedroom, I halted at the doorway. The focus of my gaze shifted to the lock. Is it advisable to secure it? What are the implications if Julian returns to this location? I shook my head in an attempt to dispel those thoughts. "Cease, Claire. He is merely a child. What is the rationale behind that line of thinking?" Despite my efforts to suppress it, the thought persisted in my mind. I entered the bed, repositioning the lightweight sheet over my body to enhance my sense of security. I closed my eyes. However, the sense of unease persisted. The night extended in a state of quietude and immobility. However, it is important to note that silence can often be perceived as the most significant threat. Julian was visualized approaching, exhibiting a resolute expression in his eyes. A shiver coursed through my body upon the realization of his proximity. The uncertainty in my mind increased, reaching a level where I was momentarily unsure of the appropriate course of action. What is occurring? At that moment, Julian inclined his body toward me, maintaining direct eye contact. The fear and hesitation were palpable, mirroring my own emotions. I paused momentarily, my voice exhibiting signs of tremor as I articulated my thoughts. "Halt, Julian." The slight tremor in my voice indicated an unmistakable presence of fear. "I am your stepmother. How could you possibly consider such a notion?" Julian paused momentarily, his eyes widening in astonishment. His progress halted suddenly. However, the tension and silence that enveloped us intensified further. This event is not feasible. The task was not feasible. The state of my mind was deteriorating into disorder. Upon observing him, it was evident that my facial expression, a combination of confusion and fear, was likely conveying my discomfort. What is the basis for that thought? The situation was disorienting. Julian exhaled slowly, his breath steady yet slightly unsteady. His gaze remained fixed on mine. He gradually stepped back, establishing a measurable distance between us. The tension was palpable, permeating the entire room. "I need to communicate a point, Julian," I stated, my voice exhibiting signs of tremor and uncertainty. "Upon observing you during your slumber the other morning, I came to a realization. You have transitioned out of childhood. You have demonstrated significant maturity. My verbal expression was hesitant, yet my emotions were too constrained to remain unvoiced any further. Emotional response was evident, yet articulating the appropriate terminology proved challenging. While observing him, I noted that his gaze was also directed towards me. However, I remained uncertain about the appropriate course of action. It is not solely a matter of your age. Your entire presence is encapsulated in your body. You are no longer a child." I proceeded to articulate my disoriented thoughts. "I previously regarded you as a young child and permitted you to sleep in my bed without hesitation. Upon reflection, it is evident that the decision made was incorrect. Upon reflection, it becomes evident how hazardous the situation could have been for both parties involved. I will not disclose this information to your father," I stated with a measured tone. "You are a remarkable individual, and it is likely that you receive considerable attention at the university. However, in return for my discretion, you will reside with your aunt for a period of time. It is imperative that you do not remain here. Do you comprehend?" Julian paused for a moment, then gradually lowered his head. His eyes reflected a sense of regret. "Please do not inform father," he stated, his voice exhibiting signs of tremor. "I sincerely apologize. I will reside with my aunt, I assure you." His facial expression exhibited a combination of various emotions: fear, regret, and a potential sense of emptiness. However, an additional element was present, an aspect that eluded verbal articulation. Claire contemplated the possibility of having had feelings for Julian. What are the implications of having made an error? She inhaled deeply. The thoughts exerted significant pressure on her mind. His youth and energy created a sense of confusion for me. Regardless of the precautions taken, a brief lapse in judgment or emotional turmoil has the potential to alter the entire situation. However, I believe I managed the situation effectively. Regardless of my actions, I made the appropriate decision. She paused briefly, nodding to herself as she mentally recapitulated the events. All systems are functioning as expected. The situation was unusual and presented various challenges. However, it has now concluded. Julian relocated to reside with his aunt, and the situation is satisfactory. She experienced confusion. However, at this moment, she perceived that everything was manageable. Claire paused momentarily and exhaled, indicating a sense of relief. She reassured herself, stating, "Everything is fine," in an attempt to establish a sense of tranquility. At that moment, I was unaware of the events that were yet to unfold. As time progressed, the situation started to stabilize. Initially, Julian made infrequent visits to the house. However, with each subsequent visit, his behavior became increasingly typical. No further unsettling words or actions occurred as previously experienced. All elements appeared to be reverting to their original positions. Upon the arrival of the school holidays, Julian's return provided a measure of relief. Throughout that period, he underwent significant changes. His behavior exhibited increased calmness and maturity. It appeared that we had significantly separated ourselves from those intense moments. Julian's return was perceived as an evaluation for Claire. Throughout the 5-month period, she had persuaded herself that all aspects required normalization. Upon Julian's return, a noticeable change had occurred. His behavior exhibited increased maturity and composure. There were no further unusual approaches or uncomfortable behaviors observed. Claire experienced a notable reduction in anxiety upon observing that Julian had returned to his typical behavior. Claire assessed the situation and concluded that all conditions had reverted to their standard state. Julian has achieved a comprehensive understanding of the current circumstances, recognizing the established boundaries and accepting the situation. The previous tension has been entirely resolved. Claire paused for a moment, inhaling deeply. She considered the possibility that this might be the optimal solution. Time addressed the situation. Currently, the relationship between the stepmother and stepson is characterized as typical. For a period, I was under the impression that all was well. During my husband Alex's week-long business trip, I experienced a significant sense of relief. At last, a period of solitude has been achieved, providing a tranquil environment conducive to relaxation and the release of accumulated stress. Julian's behavior has exhibited a notable increase in maturity over the past few months, providing significant reassurance. Despite my reluctance to acknowledge it, the experiences we endured collectively led us to an improved outcome. The situation appeared secure, however, the events of that night were unforeseen. Following Alex's departure, the silence within the house provided an unusual feeling of tranquility. I gradually transitioned into sleep while in my bed. However, an unusual sensation was present. The nature of the subject was unknown to me. During a state of deep sleep, I was abruptly awakened in the middle of the night by an audible disturbance. A door opened with a creaking sound, followed by the sound of footsteps. A person was approaching my room. I opened my eyes wide and observed a shadow moving within. For a brief interval, I experienced a cessation of my heartbeat. Julian occupied my room. The door was closed silently behind him. A sudden onset of apprehension enveloped me. Why now? Why in this manner? I did not comprehend, yet I sensed that something was amiss. I experienced a sense of powerlessness, yet I chose to remain silent. It was necessary to manage this with precision. Julian, I stated, my voice exhibiting residual fear despite my efforts to project confidence. What is your purpose for being here? His gaze fixed on mine, and his composed tone heightened my discomfort. Affirmative, Claire, he stated, as though this situation were entirely routine. I wish to engage in conversation. I desire your company. The tension within me increased significantly. What was his objective? What were the reasons behind his sudden desire to implement changes? The intensity observed in his eyes was unsettling. He exhibited a high level of determination, exhibiting a high level of self-assurance. He appeared prepared to traverse any boundary. He advanced nearer. His gaze was directed towards mine. At that moment, every fiber of my being, including my heart, opposed him. However, concurrently, he was approaching too closely. Despite my reluctance to retreat further, I instinctively initiated a stabilization of my position. Julian, cease your actions, I stated, the discomfort in my tone evident. I am not prepared for this. Please. Internally, I was in turmoil, yet my vocal expression remained composed and assertive. Tomorrow. Tomorrow evening, all conditions will change. I will be available to assist you, but not at this moment. I struggled to maintain composure while attempting to exit the room, my gaze remaining fixed on him. The emotional state experienced was characterized by a significant level of confusion and resistance, creating a dichotomy where the individual felt both repelled and drawn toward the situation at hand. Narrator. To stay informed about upcoming developments and to access additional narratives of this nature, please ensure you subscribe and activate notifications to receive updates on new episodes. Your feedback and engagement are greatly appreciated. They serve as the essential motivation that sustains my writing efforts. Please indicate the country from which you are viewing. I would appreciate the information. Continue to monitor for the subsequent chapter. The release is imminent.